him personally. Naturally, Mr. Barnes' courtesy made a hit with me. I commenced to study him because I believed him to be worth emulating. I noticed that an atmosphere of cordiality and enthusiasm permeated his offices. I saw that every one of his salesmen, and his stenographers, and his information girl, and all the rest looked as if they were glad to be there. That was 10 years ago. I venture the suggestion that if you went into one of Mr. Barnes' offices today, in the cities of Chicago, St. Louis, or New York, unannounced, and asked for some favor, you would get the same impression which I got 10 years ago. Namely, that you were in an office where courtesy was extended because those extending it believed in it. Mr. Barnes won his way into Thomas A. Edison's confidence and got Mr. Edison to give him a job. If I remember correctly, the salary was less than $25 a week. Shortly afterward, he won his way further into Mr. Edison's confidence and got the agency for the Ediphone, the Edison dictating machine, for the city of Chicago. I did not know the exact modus operandi through which he sold Mr. Edison, but with this I am sure all who know Mr. Edison will heartily agree that he did not win it except by producing results and rendering more service and better service than he was actually paid to render. I am sure he did not quibble about either hours or pay in the beginning, and I am sure he put in much more time than he agreed to put in. From the very beginning, Mr. Barnes adopted the policy of never selling an Ediphone dictating machine where it was not needed, or a single machine more than was necessary to handle the purchaser's business efficiently. Sometimes his salesmen, in their eagerness to pile up records, would talk a customer into overbuying. Invariably, Mr. Barnes would scrutinize such transactions, detect the mistake, and give the salesman a chance to undo it before it undid the salesman, and also the firm for which he worked. A man of striking personality, friendly, congenial, and enthusiastic, Mr. Barnes was naturally an able salesman, but he never could have succeeded as he has done except through the application of rendering more service and better service than he contracted to deliver. With him, this principle seemed to come naturally. It was a part of him. Mr. Barnes' business was no easy one to establish. Dictating machines were a novelty 12 or 15 years ago, and it required the highest order of salesmanship to sell them and a still higher order of salesmanship to get people to learn to use them after they were sold. In truth, these machines saved practically half of the stenographer's time. But like every other new invention on Earth, from the steamboat to the flying machine, people had to be shown. Edwin C. Barnes sells practically the entire output of Ediphones produced in the great factories of Thomas A. Edison at East Orange, New Jersey. When I think of him, I cannot help reflecting upon my visit with 7 down and outers whom I interviewed in Chicago a few years ago, one of them a graduate of Yale University. Every one of these chaps complained that the world would not give me a chance. I thought of Edwin Barnes while I was conducting these interviews, and I wondered if the world gave him any better chance than it gave those 7 men whom I was interviewing, and who charged the world with the cause of his failure. His entree into East Orange was not very pretentious. He went there on blind baggage, found Mr. Edison, made him listen, and got a chance to prove to Mr. Edison that he did not believe the world owed him a living. Mr. Barnes' story is exactly the same as that of every other man who has succeeded. He has rendered service first and collected afterward. Instead of waiting for the world to come around and pay up the living it owes him, he has gone out and rendered the world a service that has brought him a fortune, and this while he is yet a comparatively young man. I don't know how much Mr. Barnes is worth, but it is considerable. He lives in Florida, where he takes life easy most of the year. The remainder of the time is spent in visiting his business associates, who are still conducting his business of marketing the Ediphone in the cities of Chicago, St. Louis, and New York. An interesting thing happened just a few days ago that will throw a sidelight on the Barnes way of doing things. I came to our New York office from Chicago, but on my way I stopped in to see Mr. Barnes at his office on Lower Broadway. I had my handbag with me. I left it at his office while I went out to look up a permanent place to live, as I had come to New York to stay. As I started to leave, he called me back and said, "We close the office at 6 o'clock. If you're not back by that time, I will carry your bag over to your hotel for you, if you will telephone me where you stop." And he meant what he said. Think of it. A man of his wealth and position and success, offering to lug my handbag around for me. It supports the theory that he who would be great amongst us must first be the best servant. Service rendered in the right spirit cannot fail to elevate the person who renders it. The Master said so 2,000 years ago, and every successful man could say so. Barnes has succeeded because he has served well. He has not been afraid to ride the bumpers or do anything else that had to be done in order to carry his message to Garcia. We struggle for fame and win it, and lo, like a fleeting breath, it is lost in the realm of silence, whose ruler and king is death. At a meeting of the Thomas A. Edison organization recently, at which Mr. Barnes and more than 100 of the Edison representatives were present, an incident happened that throws an interesting sidelight on both Barnes and Edison. The wizard had just been presented with a commemorative silk flag. The presentation speech was made by George M. Austin of Philadelphia. Mr. Edison was to reply, but instead, his speech was read by his son, Charles Edison. While the son was reading the speech, Mr. Edison took off his right shoe, got a jackknife, and cut a piece of leather which was hanging from the sole. The gathering watching the inventor paused and then broke out in a hearty burst of laughter. The inventor joined in the laugh and said, "Beating the profiteer. I went over to New York to buy a pair of shoes and found that they were asking $17 and $18 a pair. I went down to Cortlandt Street, and in a cellar I noticed a lot of shoes. I saw a pair that struck my fancy and bought them for $6. I've been wearing that pair of shoes for nearly a year." Standing near Mr. Edison was Edwin C. Barnes, head of the New York, Chicago, and St. Louis division. Edison pointed to Barnes and said, "Barnes would not have done it that way. He would have gone up on Broadway and paid $17 or $18 a pair." "Yes, but I would wear them for 3 or 4 years," said Barnes. "Ed Barnes pays $6 or $7 for a hat," said Mr. Edison. "Well, I would go over to New York or down to Newark and pay $2.75 for one." Edison then produced several yellow slips and said that every night he made a list of what he intended to do. Today's list contained 57 different matters that he expected to attend to. If everybody tried it for 6 months, it would be a surprise to see how much could be accomplished in 10 hours, said Mr. Edison. With all of his wealth and all of his success and his scores of friends, ranging all the way from such men as ex-President Theodore Roosevelt on down to Napoleon Hill, Mr. Barnes remains democratic and approachable by anyone who wants to see him. Not so much as a private secretary stands between his office door and the reception room. His secretary is busy looking after more important business than that of heading off people who want to see Mr. Barnes. His theory is that if anyone comes to his office to see him, that person is honoring him by doing so. Therefore, he will be just as good a sportsman and give that person a hearing, no matter what may be wanted. Every time I think of Barnes, I think of the United States Senate. He is just the type of a man we need down at Washington. He believes in serving rather than being served. And if the people of Florida were fortunate enough to get him to accept a senatorship, they would have room to congratulate themselves because he would be a servant indeed while he was in Washington. I believe the Senate could well afford a few more real servants, with such business ability as Mr. Barnes has, and whose integrity is irreproachable. It seems to me that it would in no way be inimical to the interests of the people if we had a few more successful businessmen in the Senate, and a few less professional politicians who go there for the sole purpose of trading in political favors. Barnes would be such a man. He has the ability. He has the personality to make his presence felt among his body of men. He has the courage to fight where fighting is necessary, and the diplomacy to trade where trading is better than a fight. Citizens of Florida, we commend to you your citizen Edwin C. Barnes of Bradenton, Florida, and suggest that you will be fortunate indeed if you can get him to consent to serve you as United States Senator, because he will serve you as well and as successfully as he has served Thomas A. Edison. If this writer is not mistaken, there is only one just basis upon which to sell personal service, and that is the basis of compensation, which is proportionate to the quality and the quantity of service rendered. One man is working at a lathe, receiving, let us say, $5 a day for his services. He has been in that job for several years. Another man comes along and takes the lathe next to him. He has been in that job but a few days. He is doing exactly the same class of work, but he does 1/4 more than the man who has been there for several years. Which should receive the highest wages? The answer is obvious. The length of time an employee has been on a job has nothing whatsoever to do with the wages he should receive. If it did, the old janitor who takes care of the building in which I have my offices would be receiving more wages than the superintendent of the building, because he has been there for 10 years, while the superintendent has held his job less than 6 months. There is one important thing for you to remember in marketing your personal services, and it is this: your efficiency in your work and your value to your employer can be very accurately determined by the amount of supervision which you require. If you require but little supervision, you are apt to be fairly efficient. If you require no supervision at all, you probably have reached the height of efficiency in the work you are doing. Therefore, the next move is to assume work which carries greater responsibilities. You might as well understand that you are not apt to receive very much for your services until you are prepared to assume heavy responsibilities. The big salaries are paid to men who can efficiently and satisfactorily shoulder responsibilities and assume the leadership of others. It is impossible for any man to earn $25,000 a year with his hands alone, but he may be worth 4 times that amount if he can assume the leadership of thousands of others and help them add something to their efficiency and their ability to use their hands. The 2 chief qualities which have taken so many thousands of men from the rank and file of ordinary labor and placed them in responsible executive positions are, first, the ability plus the willingness to assume heavy responsibilities, and second, the ability to help other men and women perform more efficient work by intelligently guiding them in their efforts. It is not a mere idealistic axiom. We get that which we give. It's a sound, fundamental truth upon which all successful men work. The man who gets the most from the sale of his personal services is the man who gives the most to those for whom he works, whether his job is to manage himself with but little or no supervision, or to help others intelligently direct their efforts. It is not the man who can dispose of the most details with his own hands who is sought for the job higher up. It is the man who has the ability, plus the good judgment, to get others to take care of details. If you are aiming for one of the higher up jobs, may it not be well for you to begin now to teach others how to handle the details of your present job? If you have been in the same position for a long while, and your pay remains the same, it is more than likely that you have not sought the opportunity to take on greater responsibilities, and it is also quite likely that you require as much supervision now as you did in the past. These 2 qualities act as a guidepost, if you will observe them. You can measure yourself by them very accurately. You will not be prepared to assume greater responsibilities or the leadership and direction of other workers until you have brought your own efficiency up to the high water mark. the chances are that you cannot get others to do more work or better work than you yourself make a practice of doing. Leadership develops out of the good example you set for others to follow. When you begin to lead your fellow workers in quality and quantity of work, you will be on the road to the bigger job, at better pay, and with greater responsibilities. Difficulties are never settled while passion rages. They are never permanently settled by conflict. One party may be subdued by power, but the sense of wrong will remain. The fire of passion will slumber, ready to break out again on the first occasion. Let us take the Golden Rule as a guide, and all cause for hostility will be removed. All conflict will cease, and humanity will go hand in hand to do its work and reap its just reward. We do not recall ever having heard of any man being placed in a big executive job all at one jump. But we could name hundreds of executives who got into their positions slowly, step by step, by gradually increasing their own efficiency and improving the quality and quantity of their work. When I urge upon you the necessity of doing more work and better work than you are actually paid to do, I do so not for idealistic reasons, but because I know that this principle is good business on your part. It is sound economy. It is sound because it will automatically attract to you the goodwill and cooperation of all with whom you work, including your employer. If it does not get the attention of your present employer, as it probably will, then it will attract to you some other employer who will seek you out and offer you a bigger and better job. If I am not mistaken, the best way on earth to market personal services to the greatest advantage is by attracting an employer on account of work that is better than that of the average worker. When an employer seeks you out, you may rest assured that you will be able to command a higher salary than you would if you sought the employer. And the only way to cause an employer to seek you is by performing services which are above the average in quantity and quality. This applies to the man who is in a small job and wants a bigger one with the same employer, just the same as it does to the man who wishes to change employers. I envy the man who has the sound judgment to enable him to see that it pays to perform more work and better work than he is paid to perform, and to assume responsibilities to his full capacity, instead of pushing them off onto George. I envy him because he is 1 in 10,000. That is why he is at the head instead of the foot in his calling. That is why he is drawing a salary instead of wages. That is why he is placed in charge of others. In the office next to mine is a young man who holds the job of business manager of this magazine. When he came to get the job, he asked no such foolish questions as, "What does this job pay? What will the hours be? Has it any possibilities? When will I get a raise?" Or, "Will there be any night work in it?" No, he asked no such questions as these. He took me off my feet by telling me how much he really knew about the magazine, notwithstanding the fact that the first issue of it had been on the newsstands only one day. He said he had come to go to work on the Golden Rule and that he intended to get what he came after unless I threw him out of the office. He convinced me that he wanted that job because he believed in the work back of it. He did not ask how soon I would give him an assistant, but instead he asked, "What shall I do first?" His name is W.H. Hegem. Remember the name if you want to, but I can tell you fellas who are constantly on the lookout for live wires that I do not want you snooping around the Golden Rule offices trying to get him away from me. Oh, you'll want him, but wait a minute. His earnings this year probably will go well beyond the $10,000 a year mark. Yes, he is worth it, and I shall be as glad to pay it to him as he will be to receive it. I am just like all other men who employ people. I want the best service to be had, and I am willing to pay for all that any of my associate workers can deliver. I might be willing to pay more than they actually produce, but for economic reasons, I could not keep this up indefinitely. No man can pay out money and wages and salaries which he is not producing out of the business and keep it up indefinitely. The spring soon runs dry unless it is constantly replenished. If you feel that your employer should pay you more money than you are getting, there is only one just basis upon which to ask for that extra money, and that is by first changing the nature of your work and making it produce greater returns for your employer. Perhaps you are a bookkeeper, let us say, and you do not see how you could render service that is greater in quantity or better in quality. You are working long hours as it is, and you are doing the best work that you know how to perform. What can you do that will entitle you to more than you receive? There are a dozen lines of procedure, any of which would answer this question, but to try to follow a dozen different routes is equivalent to following no route. What you really want is exactly one line of procedure. You are the bookkeeper. You make up the monthly statements of accounts and mail them out. May it not be possible that you could create a collection system which will turn those accounts into ready cash as fast as they become due? If you could do this, is it not probable that your employer will be glad to pay you in proportion to the results you get? You can broaden the scope of your responsibilities by voluntarily performing more work than that of merely keeping the books. You can do this without in any way decreasing your efficiency in your bookkeeping work. Work out a series of collection letters, which will create goodwill for your employer and at the same time collect the money that is due him. Most any old top can do it when someone tells him to and shows him how. But what the man who furnishes the payroll wants is a man who sees what ought to be done and goes ahead and does it without being told. The law of supply and demand sets a certain general average salary that an ordinary bookkeeper can command. To get more than this, he must perform some service which is not usually performed by the ordinary bookkeeper. In brief, he must take himself out of the ordinary class or else be satisfied with ordinary wages. There is nothing sentimental about this practice of performing more work and better work than one is paid to perform. It is simply sound business practice. Of course, if you perform your work in a cheerful, enthusiastic spirit, you will likely attract people to you more readily. You will become more apt to succeed in a big way if you develop an attractive, pleasing personality, along with the habit of performing more work and better work than you are paid to perform. In fact, a pleasing personality may be laid down as a necessary qualification for success in any undertaking in which one is serving others. Chapter 9. Attractive Personality. The 9th billboard on the road to success is attractive personality. My heart goes out to the man who walks the streets looking for a job. It is the most discouraging task a human being ever performed. I earnestly wish I might reach every man and woman on earth who are out of employment and give them the pass key to whatever position they are prepared to fill. I will tell you that this key is in the very words in which I passed it on to a reader of the Golden Rule who came to see me today. He was out of a job. He had called on more than a dozen firms, but they had all turned him down. I asked him to tell me exactly what he had said when he asked for employment. He described his canvass by saying that he had simply gone in and asked if there was a position open. Before receiving a reply, he had stated that he was out of employment and would be willing to accept any reasonable salary as a starter. He was turned away as rapidly as he applied. The reason was obvious. Why I think so is disclosed by what I said to him. First, I asked him to stand up so I could look him over, just as the person to whom he applied for work had done. He had on a pair of shoes that were run down at the heels. He wore a cap. Otherwise, his clothes were becoming. These were my suggestions to him. Go out and have a shoemaker build up your heels. This will give you a feeling of greater self-confidence, something that you will need. Buy yourself a hat that is becoming and throw away that cap. This will make you feel like a man instead of a boy and give you a dignified look that you will need. Decide exactly what position you wish to get and the firm that you wish to work for. Go out and find out all you can about the firm and be prepared to give some good reasons why you believe you can serve it in the position you seek. Then go to the firm and say this: I have decided to accept a position with you. You don't know it, but that's what I am here for. I want such and such a position which I know I can fill in a manner that will be profitable to you. I am ready to go to work right now if you will tell me where I will find a peg to hang my hat and coat on. Oh yes, the salary. Suppose we forget about that until you have seen me in the harness for a week. Then if you feel that I have earned anything, you may put it in my pay envelope. He followed my suggestions. In less than 2 hours, he was back at my office. His heels had been built up. His hair had been trimmed. He had exchanged the frown on his face for a smile. I pronounced him ready for the trial. He left, and in less than an hour, telephoned me that he was at work in a new job. There are different ideas as to what success is, but whether your idea of success is the accumulation of wealth, or the rendering of some great service to mankind, or both, you will not likely achieve it unless you have a definite plan of procedure mapped out. In the last 10 years, I suppose I have passed this idea on to more than 100 people, and in every single case, as far as I have any knowledge of the results, it has worked successfully. I tell you, the business world is looking for the man who has enough confidence in himself to go to work on these terms. In 99 cases out of 100, a man will parlay, argue, and do everything possible to persuade a prospective employer to start him at the highest possible salary. There is only one true basis for the payment of money in return for personal services, and it is this: a man is entitled to remuneration in proportion to the quality and quantity of his service he renders. The experience he has had, his age, his ability, and his standing have nothing to do with the salary he should receive. Nothing but the service he renders counts. You need have no fear of competition from the man who says, I'm not paid to do that, therefore I'll not do it. He will never be a dangerous competitor for your job. But watch out for the fellow who stays at his desk or workbench until his work is finished. Watch out that such fellow does not challenge you to the post and pass you at the grandstand. In prosperous times like these, there is absolutely no reason for any person walking the streets without employment. Through the use of this plan, whether by personal application or by letter, any man who needs the kind of services that you can render is more than apt to give you a trial. And a trial is all you want. If you don't make good, you'll be slated for the exit skids anyway, whether you go to work under this plan or at an agreed salary. Many a capable man has been floored when applying for a position by this question: what experience have you had? Now, he may not have had very much experience, but deep down in his heart he knows he can do the work and do it well. Honor demands that he reply truthfully, which usually means that the interview ends right there. Now, if you are ever confronted with this sort of a situation, suppose you say, now look here, don't you believe that a sample of my work would answer your question better than anything I might say about myself? Naturally, I am prejudiced in my own behalf, but if you'll show me a place to hang my hat and coat, I'll jump in and show you what I can do on my own time, and if you don't like my work, you shall not pay me a cent for it. That ends the matter. Most men will give you the chance you ask for. If you have doubts that this plan will work, you can try it out and convince yourself that it will. Write a dozen letters to as many different firms. I'll tell you how to word the first paragraph, and it'll not make much difference how you word the remainder of the letter. Write it as follows: I have made up my mind to go to work for you, and one of the qualities with which I am blessed is the bulldog persistency of coming back with whatever I go after. I want the position of blank, and my salary to begin with is to be 0, and to remain at that figure until I have made myself so valuable to you that you will want to keep me and pay me in proportion to the quality and quantity of work I perform. The foregoing is the sum and substance that should mark the opening of your letter. It will bring results. Out of 12 letters, you ought to receive 6 acceptances if you use care in the selection of those to whom you send these letters. In the closing paragraphs of your letter, you will, of course, give full information concerning yourself and state just why you believe you can fill the position you seek. Give references and the like. This will save time and eliminate useless correspondence. 12 years ago, a freight train rolled into East Orange, New Jersey, carrying a passenger who rode without a pass or ticket. He went to that New Jersey city for a specific purpose, and that was to get a job with Thomas A. Edison. He got what he went after. His name was Edwin C. Barnes. His wages to start with were $25 a week, but they did not remain at that figure long. The old man Edison himself saw that Barnes had one quality which made him desirable, not merely as a department manager, but as a partner in a branch of the great Edison Industries. That quality is the same one which this writer mentioned in the editorial on the first page of the January edition of this magazine, namely, the habit of performing more work than one is paid to perform. Edwin C. Barnes is your editor's close personal friend, a friend whom he greatly admires, but this is not the reason why Mr. Barnes is mentioned in these columns. He is mentioned because he is a living example of the soundness of the policy of performing more work than is paid for. When Mr. Barnes presented himself to Edison just after alighting from the blind baggage that brought him to town, there was no job open for him. Something that he said to Mr. Edison during the interview nearly cost him his chance to become a partner of the world's greatest scientist and inventor. But it turned out to be the influence that got him his trial. During the conversation, he said to Mr. Edison, "You know I don't have to work." And just as Mr. Edison was opening the door to show him the way out, Barnes finished the sentence. "I could starve to death." This tickled Edison, who saw that a man who could joke like that on an empty stomach might become a pretty fair worker on a full stomach. So he hired him without further questioning. I don't know what Mr. Barnes' personal income is, but I do know that his interest in the Edison enterprise is easily worth $100,000, if not more. This represents the returns for his services covering a period of 12 years. It is not as well as some men have done, but it is much better than a great many others have done. Mr. Barnes employs scores of salesmen who sell the Ediphone. He has a notion that no salesman ought to sell a machine unless it is needed by the purchaser. Furthermore, he makes it his business to see that no salesman sells any firm or individual more machines than he can use economically. When an Ediphone is installed, does Barnes divide the profit on the machine with the old man Edison and then promptly forget about the transaction? On your life, he does not. His idea is that a dictating machine has not been sold until it has served the buyer satisfactorily during its natural life, which is a great many years. Every month, Barnes sends a man around to look over every Ediphone in use and to see that it is serving the purchaser satisfactorily. There are other dictating machines on the market, probably as good as the Ediphone, but as far as the writer has ever been able to ascertain, there is only one Barnes Edison service sold with a dictating machine. As a partner in the Edison dictating machine industry, Mr. Barnes covers just 3 cities: Chicago, New York, and St. Louis. There are at least a dozen other cities in the United States waiting for a counterpart of Edwin C. Barnes to come along and develop them as a partner of Thomas A. Edison, just as Barnes has done in these 3 cities. Freight trains continue to run into East Orange. Mr. Edison is still in business there. If you really and truly believe in the practice of performing more work than you are paid to perform, and are willing to begin in the way that Barnes began, you can become an Edison partner. It may be that you don't care to enter the business that Mr. Barnes is engaged in. Probably a partnership with Charles M. Schwab in the steel business would suit you better. Or a partnership with Rockefeller in the oil business, or with Morgan in the banking business. You can get into any of these great enterprises if you make up your mind to do so. The chances are that your present job has just as great possibilities as any of these would have. You can duplicate Edwin C. Barnes' success without going to work for Edison. Selling dictating machines is about the hardest sort of selling. It is hard because you have to convince the stenographer that the machine will enable her to perform at least twice as much work in a day as she could perform without it, and that her salary probably will eventually be regulated accordingly. Then you have to convince the man who pays for the machine that it not only costs him nothing in the run of a year's business use, but that it actually saves him many times its original cost. Neither of these tasks is easy of accomplishment. Therefore, you may find it more desirable to stay right where you are. If your employer happens not to be as successful as Edison, perhaps this condition offers you your big opportunity. Nobody told Barnes how to induce Edison to take him into partnership, and no one can tell you how to induce your employer to do it. But if you make up your mind to get there, you will, just as Barnes did. You'll find the way. I know Edwin C. Barnes intimately. He has no more brains or ability than many another who is not doing half as well. The secret of his success is not superior brains, not pull, not luck, but the habit of doing all the useful work he can without regard to the money that he receives for it. The first time this writer ever saw Mr. Barnes, we met by mere accident. I went into his office to ask for some information and happened to meet him coming out of his office. He not only gave me the information I sought, but he took me in his automobile to see a man who knew more about the subject on which I sought information than Mr. Barnes did. He went a long way out of his path to accommodate a man whom he had never seen before and whom he probably never expected to see again. But that was the Barnes